So real quick, I want to just review some of the major topics from Chapter 3. So Chapter 3 was all about Earth systems, and we looked at the four main Earth systems, then a few that kind of fall into these main four. We first talked about the biosphere, so that includes organic things. So birds in the air, animals on the ground, animals in the ground, marine organisms, sea creatures, microscopic organisms, plants, all types of vegetation, grass, human beings. And this is important because each of these types will interact with other spheres of Earth systems, which we'll not really get into a lot during this chapter, but as we examine the other spheres, you can kind of see how they interact. The second was the atmosphere, um, made up of all of the gases that surround Earth. And here are the different layers: troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, thermosphere, exosphere. And you need to know kind of some of the different attributes of each of these, what's going on in them. And you can go back and look at your notes or the previous lectures, but understand the atmosphere and the different layers that make it up, and know that it is all of the gases that surround Earth. The next is the hydrosphere. So the hydrosphere is all of the water on Earth. So that's water in the air, in the atmosphere, water on the ground, water under the ground, all the water in the oceans. And you need to know that most of it is salt water. Know that 3% is fresh water. I know the definition of fresh water as well. But I know that most of the fresh water is actually trapped in ice caps and glaciers, and only 1% of Earth's fresh water is easily accessible. And what's not frozen is groundwater. So make sure you understand the distribution of Earth's water in the hydrosphere. And then we also talked about the cryosphere, which is part of the hydrosphere. This is all the frozen part of the hydrosphere, and this includes ice caps. On mountains, it includes glaciers, ice sheets, ice shelves, sea ice, icebergs, and then permafrost. And then ice over lakes and rivers and things like that, snow. But this is all still part of the hydrosphere, and the hydrosphere just any water in plants and animals. It's just all of the water. And then finally, there's the geosphere, and understand that it's the solid part of Earth. Goes from the inner core, outer core, mantle, and then the crust. That's the main parts of the geosphere. And then know about rocks and minerals. Know what makes up a mineral. What are the characteristics that define a mineral? And then the three types of rocks: igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary. And know that rocks are made up of minerals quite often. And then we talked about interactions between the different systems. We talked about the water cycle, which is how the hydrosphere interacts with the atmosphere. So you have water going up into the atmosphere through evaporation, and then condensation, and then precipitation, it falling back down onto the geosphere, and then it collects across the geosphere. And then water also is used by living things. So plants will take water, and then transpiration is water evaporating from the things, and respiration is when we breathe out water vapor, living things that breathe. So this is the water cycle, is how the hydrosphere interacts with all the other spheres. And then we looked at the changes in the atmosphere. We talked about weather. And so weather, definitely you see an interaction between the hydrosphere, looking back at the evaporation, condensation, and precipitation, all definitely is water. So hydrosphere interacting in the atmosphere. And then using the map here, we see how the atmosphere affects the geosphere. And we also talked about climate, and climate being the weather patterns in a region over a long period of time. Usually like 30 years is how they check it, but you can check the climate in an area and see what is the temperature normally, how has it changed, what kind of precipitation do they have. So understand the difference between weather and climate and some of the different factors that affect climate. Like mountain ranges and the oceans are the biggest, and then understand the different factors of weather, precipitation, wind, air pressure, all of those different areas that we talked about, you'll need to understand. And then finally, we talked about the rock cycle. And a lot of it has to do with how the three different types of rocks are formed: igneous being formed from magma, and metamorphic being formed from high pressure and temperatures, and sedimentary being formed through sediments being deposited, and then compaction and cementation. And know that each of these types of rocks can be formed into other types of rocks. And understand the rock cycle. We see interaction between the geosphere and the atmosphere through weathering, so through wind and weather, and then also through the hydrosphere, also weathering through the water and the rain, and then oceans and rivers, waves and running water, weathering rocks, and then also through erosion, those two spheres carrying the weathered sediments and things away from one location to another. And also the biosphere. Animals will dig up, and we human beings excavate. And so we see all four systems interacting with each other through each of these different types of cycles. So you'll have a review sheet, and we'll review during class as well. And make sure that if you have any questions, you can come to office hours, and we can go over whatever you don't understand, but our test will be Tuesday. So make sure you're prepared and go over your notes.